The more I learn about Moon Knight, the more fascinated I am with the character.
Oh, mate, thank you. Oh, thanks. Cheers.
He's one of the most interesting heroes in Marvel Comics and the MCU right now, and part of the reason is his wide assortment of hidden powers and abilities. Like, did you know he can control Mjolnir? Did you know his mind is protected from psychic attacks? Did you know he's basically immortal? See, a ton of hidden abilities that I want to talk about today. So here's the list of all sorts of Moon Knight's special tricks and powers. Let's get started right now. One of Moon Knight's most interesting hidden abilities is the fact that he can wield Mjolnir. No, it's not because the avatar of Khonshu is worthy or anything like that, but it's because of one of the most amusing comic loopholes I've ever seen, and it all relates to what Thor's hammer is made out of. So we all know the hammer is made from Uru, which is an extremely rare Marvel metal. It's a metal ore that comes from the first moon in existence. When two elder gods were having a wrestling match, they destroyed the moon, and its pieces eventually crashed onto Nidavellir and was collected by dwarves. Those dwarves then presented a piece of Uru to Odin, who used his magic to trap a powerful raging cosmic storm called the God Tempest into the piece of Uru, and then told the dwarves to forge that piece into Mjolnir. Cool, right? Well, fast forward to today when Odin's enchantment means only those that are worthy can pick up Mjolnir. But because Moon Knight is the avatar of the moon god Khonshu, he comes with the ability to control any piece of moon-related material. So in this case, Moon Knight's ability to control moon rock trumps Mjolnir's enchantment, and Mark Spector once surprised Thor with this ability by smacking the God of Thunder with his own hammer. Now, it's a long shot for sure right now, but how cool would it be if we could see this moment in live action? Mjolnir is back after being destroyed, and Moon Knight hopefully has a bright future ahead of him in the MCU, so please, let's hope this moment can eventually happen. Moon Knight is practically immortal as long as he remains on Khonshu's good side. I always think immortality is a bit of an iffy superpower. For one, knowing a character is immortal sometimes takes all the narrative tension out of the situation. I mean, if you know that they aren't in real danger, then what exactly are the stakes? But on the other hand, if you're reading a comic book with your favorite hero, you know they aren't going to bite the bullet anytime soon anyway. And then the narrative is forced to find creative and interesting workarounds to the whole immortal situation. Just because a character is immortal doesn't mean they still can't be hurt both physically and emotionally. Anyways, being the avatar of Khonshu means that Mark is able to be revived by the powerful Egyptian god whenever his heart stops beating, and he's been resurrected in the comics a bunch of times. You know, if this was me, I'd probably try testing this out to see how much I could annoy Khonshu. Oh, I'm super allergic to peanuts and would basically explode if I ever touch one, but I would eat peanut butter sandwiches all the time if I knew Khonshu wanted to keep me alive. Although it's easy to just think of Moon Knight as just a vigilante with cool upgraded weapons and an Egyptian god watching his back, there are hidden mystical abilities that Moon Knight has been known to tap into from time to time. Most famously, in the Age of Khonshu crossover comic, Moon Knight basically breaks bad and turns against all his fellow Avengers because Khonshu told him to. This led to him using his pair of magic ankhs to battle and steal things from heroes like Iron Fist, Doctor Strange, and Ghost Rider. Well, in Ghost Rider's case, Moon Knight didn't necessarily as much fight him than he did steal his car, but that's sort of the same thing, right? This overall shows how in tune Mark generally is with mysticism and how he can use that to his advantage to best some of the strongest magic users in Marvel Comics. Though this ability did have a limitation. When stealing abilities from other heroes, Mark used a divine ankh, but that ankh was useless against someone like Black Panther because Black Panther's abilities literally coursed through his veins thanks to the heart-shaped herb, and Moon Knight couldn't steal that. I kinda hope they adapt the Age of Khonshu storyline in the MCU at one point, because as cool as it is seeing Moon Knight be the hero, I would want to see the other Avengers have to face him in all his wonderful personalities in order to stop some nefarious deed. So this list is all about hidden abilities and powers that Moon Knight has, and sometimes a hidden ability can be just knowing the right people. Moon Knight is very close with a weapons designer known as Buck Lime, and Buck is known for making all sorts of cool weapons for Moon Knight that mimic other famous heroes. For example, Moon Knight has been known to use copied items like a Captain America shield, Spider-Man's web shooters, and even Wolverine's claws. Man, Moon Knight is already pretty cool, but imagine he shows up on the battlefield and whips out his fancy energy shield shaped like Captain America's shield, then stabs you with his retractable Wolverine claws, and then swings away using some homemade web shooters, you'd probably be in equal amounts confusion and, pain. Now all I can do is picture a fight in the MCU between Moon Knight and Taskmaster. But seriously, Buck Lime is a great connection for Moon Knight to have and gives him all sorts of unique and fun weapons that aren't all Egyptian related. He could be the next great guy in the chair and give characters like Ned Leeds a run for their money. Some would call Mark's dissociative identity disorder a hindrance in a fight, but it does have its advantages. Obviously, all of Mark's personalities are capable of helping in different, unique ways when necessary, and although it creates a bit of turmoil within Mark's mind, his disorder has helped make him this incredibly complex hero in the comics. And though there are some that would call his mind a mess, it actually helps against psychic users who specialize in mind attacks. Say there's a villain who wants to target him with possession or some type of mental control. Well, they would find that Mark's mind is so chaotic that it wouldn't necessarily work. We've seen that in effect in the comics when everyone around him comes under a mental attack and Moon Knight is left standing around with a "hey, what's happening" attitude. Classic Moon Knight. But maybe that's not giving Khonshu enough credit. The big question is how much of that protection is due to his disorder and how much of it is because of Khonshu's influence on his life. It's probably a mixture of both. Those two factors together create a strong mental fortitude against oncoming attacks. And as we've seen in the comics, anyone who tries to invade Mark's mind to take over or try to cause harm usually does not have a good time. Mark has said that his disorder and his Khonshu interactions have turned his mind into poisoned ground, so it's best not to mess with him. We've seen this in the MCU show specifically, but Moon Knight is also incredibly damage resistant. Like in the Disney Plus show, we know that when Mark summons his suit, either in its OG Moon Knight form or in the more stylish Mr. Knight fit, he can definitely take a few hits. We see his cape becomes bulletproof and that his body heals almost instantly from life-threatening impalings, which is just kind of funny to me. Like, you're saying the cape can stop bullets, but his regular front part, which presumably should be made out of the same material, isn't strong enough to stop people with sharp spears stabbing right through Mark's body. But while the magic suit giving him damage resistance is the explanation in the TV show, I think that's a bit different than what we see in the comics. There, we see that Mark has just a regular suit that's reinforced with strong material, and that's what allows him to be a bit more damage resistant overall. Also, in the comics, he just doesn't mind the pain that much. He has a high tolerance for pain and torture in general, which makes him less inclined to block incoming attacks that come his way. I mean, that's his whole thing, right? He wears bright white because he wants his enemies to see him coming, and that's the mindset of someone who doesn't really feel as much pain as you and me. When you're dealing with someone named Moon Knight, then you would expect that the moon has something to do with his powers. And guess what? You'd be right. Whatever phase the moon is in does absolutely affect Mark's abilities. So here's a word of advice: never fight Moon Knight on a full moon. That's basically a recipe for disaster. When the moon is at its peak like that, then so is Mark Spector. That also means that other moon phases like waning or waxing or new moon all directly affect Moon Knight's strength and durability. So if you do decide to commit to a life of crime and you know Moon Knight is around, maybe just brush up on your lunar terminology a bit, might help you out. And this is why I want to see Moon Knight fight Werewolf by Night in the MCU. Both characters are at their most powerful whenever the moon is full, which makes them just overall fun counterpoints to each other. When Moon Knight has the spirit of Khonshu flowing through him, he's been known to raise the dead from time to time. Now, that's an equally impressive and terrifying ability to have in your back pocket. Especially now that we've seen undead mummies in the MCU, those things were terrifying. That was definitely the scariest thing I've seen in the MCU since I saw Dr. Eric Selvig streaking in Thor: The Dark World. But now imagine a scenario where in the MCU, Moon Knight raises an army of those mummies and controls them? Terrifying. In the comics, Moon Knight has used this to help defeat Doctor Strange, which makes sense. You need a powerful hidden ability like Necromancy to beat the Sorcerer Supreme. Like a lot of these abilities, this is only one that Mark can use when he's fully tapping into Khonshu's powers, and all it does is confirm that these Egyptian deities are no joke. Quick, Moon Knight to the moon copter. Okay, I know that being an expert pilot isn't a really strong or interesting hidden ability on its own, but I just wanted to include it because it allows me to talk about the moon copter. So because of his long history as a mercenary, of course Mark knows how to pilot aircrafts. But because comics are goofy sometimes, this has led to things like the moon copter, which is the aircraft that Mark uses to get around in the comics. It's an advanced aircraft that's, yes, shaped a bit like a moon crescent, and is equipped with a series of weapons and fancy technological upgrades. And come on, moon copter? Call it something else, Mark. How about the Nightwing? Yeah, okay, I guess you'd run into some copyright issues there. Oh well. And really, I guess I shouldn't discount the pilot ability. I mean, how many Avengers do you know that can fly an aircraft? I remember Bruce Banner, one of the smartest men in the universe, freaking out over flying that ship in Thor Ragnarok.
I don't know how to fly one of these!
Are you a scientist? Use one of your PhDs.
Yeah, all of a sudden the ability to fly a plane really comes in handy, doesn't it? At one point, Moon Knight could pass through solid objects, sort of like vision. There's a bit more to the ability than that though, and it's not as simple as it sounds. This happened after Moon Knight had returned home from a time-traveling adventure, and he found that he could see the world through Khonshu's eyes. He saw ghostly images everywhere, and when he stepped outside, he phased right through his glass door and was immediately dressed in his Moon Knight costume. It allowed him overall to be a much stronger servant to Khonshu, and honestly, I hope we see a version of this in the MCU in some capacity. Like, the next step in the MCU partnership between Khonshu and Mark would be a merging of their minds, and Mark could become a stronger avatar because of it. I think that sounds cool. The MCU show has been focused on its Indiana Jones adventure tone, and I think that's great for this season, but if Moon Knight does return in the future, I really hope they emphasize his detective abilities a bit more back in a New York setting, because the real treat of a lot of Moon Knight comics is seeing Mark use his three personalities to solve crimes and showcase his detective skills. Mark is obviously the brute force and general weapon, Stephen Grant is the millionaire businessman who rubs elbows with the elite, and then Jake Lockley is the cab driver with street connections. All those working together ensures that Moon Knight has a great ear to the pulse of the city and knows more than a lot of people, which he then uses to get information. I understand that the show didn't want to highlight this as much because they wanted to set him apart from DC's Batman, but I don't think it copies the Caped Crusader if done correctly. So because I've mentioned before how his mystical Ankh allowed him to capture other heroes' abilities, and I thought I should go ahead and mention the rest of his arsenal. This may not be a hidden power per se, but his ability to be dangerous with just about any weapon you put in his hand certainly deserves a mention. Let's not forget Mark was a highly proficient mercenary, so he's proficient with almost all firearms, but besides being an expert marksman, he's also great with swords, batons, chains, boomerangs, longbows, you name it, Moon Knight can use it. And on top of that, he has his iconic crescent darts, which are like batarangs, only crescent shaped, as well as his multi-purpose truncheon that can be used as a club, a staff, a grappling hook, etc. And like I mentioned, the Ankhs he carries are both solid blunt instruments that could easily put you in the hospital, as well as being significant mystical weapons. When a hero is a great fighter in the MCU, it usually doesn't properly showcase it. And what we've seen from Mark in the show, yes, he's highly proficient and fun to watch as he takes down bad guys, but it isn't the best representation of what Moon Knight is supposed to be able to do. To start, Mark is normally a former heavyweight boxing champion, which is already dangerous, but then on top of that, he's also a master martial artist who knows judo, Krav Maga, karate, Muay Thai, Kung Fu, all of it. He really doesn't need any magical ability when he's able to do all that. Okay, some people might not consider this a hidden superpower, but Bruce Wayne once said it was, so I'm counting it. Moon Knight is tremendously wealthy. Like, he's a billionaire. In the comics, he's worth an estimated $2.3 billion, which is just insane. In the comics, he uses that money to always buy the most advanced weapons, suits, vehicles, gadgets, etc. He also probably has to buy a lot of whiteout and stain remover to keep his clothes as pearly white as he normally does. I just assume his dry cleaning bill isn't cheap is all I'm saying. Anyways, anyone who's that rich and still decides to dress up and fight crime is an interesting case study to examine. The money comparisons once again make Moon Knight traditionally compared to Bruce Wayne or even Tony Stark, but unlike those two, Mark became this rich because I guess he was just a great investor. So maybe being rich isn't a great hidden ability, but I would say being great with money management certainly counts, right? I wanted to end things on a bit of a fun one. One time, due to some comic book shenanigans, the characters of Peter Parker and Mark Spector were combined to make Arachknight. This was basically Peter Parker, but with 4 separate identities, who was once bitten by a mystical spider that granted him powers and shattered his mind. So it was a Peter Parker version of Moon Knight with all of Spider-Man's abilities. Is this a long way of saying I want MCU's Peter Parker to meet Oscar Isaac's Moon Knight, just so it would be funny to see that live-action meeting while simultaneously seeing Oscar Isaac's Spider-Man 2099 meet Miles Morales in the animated Spider-Verse movies? Yes it is. So I know it's not so much an ability, but between Moon Knight and Mr. Knight, which suit do you guys like more? I can never decide, as they're both cool but in totally opposite ways. Let me know in the comments which one you think is better, because I'm a deeply curious person. Thanks for watching.